Hello students, welcome to Drishti IAS. My name is Saloni Nandkyoliar and today we are going to talk about something very important as the degree of protection for the hills in Aravalli has changed. So this is going to have a significant impact on the adjoining ecosystem as well. So let's see what has happened over here. So as per a new definition of hills in the Aravalli, a new definition that was submitted by the Ministry of Environment and it has also been approved by the Supreme Court, for any relief in the Aravalli range to qualify as a hill, that relief should have a height of at least 100 meters or above. 100 meters or above what? The ground level or the local relief. So for any relief to qualify as a hill in the Aravalli range, the height should be at least 100 meters or above the ground level. Please note that we're not talking about the mean sea level. We are talking about the ground level, and ground level itself is above the sea level. And if there's any relief, any topography on the ground, that is also going to have some height. So what's going to happen here? This 100 meter or above is actually the effective height of that relief. So please understand this with the help of an example. If there is a relief which is 190 meters above sea level, okay, there is a relief in the Aravalli range which is 190 meters above sea level and it is surrounded by some topography. And the height of this topography is 100 meters above sea level. This relief is 190 meters above sea level. It is surrounded by some topography, by the local relief, surrounding relief, which is 100 meters above sea level. So what is the effective height of this relief? What is the height of this relief above the ground level or local relief? It is 90 meters. Does this qualify as a hill as per the new definition? No. This does not qualify as a hill, and this is the challenge over here, because by the new definition, at least 90% of the existing hills in the Aravalli range are going to lose their status of being hills because they're not going to qualify this criteria of being at least 100 meters or above the ground level or local relief. This is the challenge. 90% of the hills are going to lose their status. Now what happens if they're going to lose their status of being a hill? Then legally some hazardous activities are going to be allowed in those areas. And those activities are quarrying, mining, construction, etc. These activities are going to be legally allowed in those areas. This is going to be a significant challenge because now the entire ecosystem is going to be under threat. As per the new definition, you are only protecting the high and very high hills. But what about the low hills, the low-lying hills or the mid-height hills? What about these? They are not being protected, but they are equally important for our ecosystem. If these hills are allowed such hazardous activities, it is going to have severe consequences on the entire Aravalli range as well as the adjoining areas, particularly the Delhi NCR region. Because if I talk about the consequence over here, the entire Aravalli range is of great significance. If you see, this range basically acts as a divide. This is a geographical or a climatic divide between the Thar Desert and the Indo-Gangetic, the fertile Indo-Gangetic plains. Historically, the Aravalli range has contained the Thar Desert. It has stopped the expansion of Thar Desert into the Indo-Gangetic plains. But if these hills are not given adequate protection over a period of time, of course hundreds of years, but over a period of time, Thar Desert could expand to the fertile Indo-Gangetic plains, and then the agriculture activities are going to be affected. The climatic conditions are going to be affected because this range acts as a proper geographical and climatic divide. So all forms of hills are important. Low-lying hills and middle hills also are very, very important, equally important as the high and very high hills. And when I talk about the adjoining areas, particularly the Delhi NCR region is going to suffer a lot, because these hills, they also act as barriers. They also act as barriers as they do not allow the dust particles, the storm particles to enter the adjoining areas of Delhi NCR. They act as the lungs for the adjoining areas, and all hills again are important here. The high and the very high hills, they block the very fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, but even the low-lying hills, they block the dusty and sandy particles from crossing the barrier, from entering the adjoining areas. The condition of air pollution is already very bad in Delhi NCR. It's already very high. And if this happens, if these activities are allowed in the low-lying plains, in the low-lying hills, if such activities are going to be allowed and these hills are not going to be given adequate protection, then more and more dust storms, more and more pollutants are going to enter the adjoining areas, and the air pollution situation is only going to worsen. So it's of significant effect, particularly for the Delhi NCR region. Next, the Aravalli, the hills in Aravalli, they also act as groundwater rechargers, because they recharge the groundwater. There are some areas in these hills that allow the percolation of rainwater. Rainwater enters the earth's surface, it goes inside and it recharges the groundwater levels, it recharges the groundwater table. But if these hills are not protected, the groundwater levels are also going to be affected. This again is a significant challenge. And then these areas, these hills that we are talking about, they are also important biodiversity or wildlife corridors. They are very important biodiversity or wildlife corridors. We know that the Aravallis, they extend from Delhi to Gujarat via Haryana and Rajasthan. So in all these areas, these hills, the Aravalli range, it acts as a biodiversity corridor, as a wildlife corridor. It allows the migration of wildlife. It gives them habitat. But if these things are not protected, these hills are not protected, we are also going to face habitat fragmentation, habitat loss. We're also going to face an effect on the migration of this wildlife. Many species will go endangered. So a lot of things are going to happen. Biodiversity is also at risk. That is why I have been using the term ecosystem. The entire ecosystem is going to be affected, because the consequences here are not one or two. They are multifold. They are multidimensional. That is why adequate protection needs to be given even to the low-lying hills in Aravalli. Now, if this is all so important, what was the need for the revision, or what was the need for such a definition to come into picture? So if I tell you the whole story, so what happened here is that until now, there was no uniform or single definition of the hills in Aravalli. So these different states that we saw, these different states, the UT, Delhi, they basically had different definitions of Aravalli, because there was no single uniform definition. So they were giving different degrees of protection based on their definition. That is why the Supreme Court in 2024 had directed the government to come up with a uniform definition of the hills in Aravalli, so that these activities, the hazardous activities that I've talked about, they can be contained. We required a uniform definition that is going to be followed by all these states and UTs. Now, what happened here is that In October 2025, this proposal was submitted. This definition of 100 meters or above was submitted. But before this, there was another proposal that was not submitted. But that proposal basically talked about a different criteria, a more flexible criteria. In 2024 itself, the subcommittee, the technical subcommittee that was formed by the government, it gave a different proposal. That was that the relief should be 30 meter or above 30 meter or above in height. This was also above the ground level, 30 meter or above, and some slope criteria was also given. Roughly 4 degree of slope should be there. Now here also the height was above the ground level or the local relief. But please note that this was 30 meter or above in comparison to the present 100 meter or above. So this was covering a lot of the low-lying hills, a lot of the mid-height hills, and this could have been a more flexible definition of the hills for the Aravalli. But this was not submitted. What was submitted was this 100 meter height proposal. And this was accepted. No slope definitions, just a single criterion, that is 100 meters in height, 100 meter or above the ground level or the local relief level. So this is the entire backstory of why did we need to have a definition for the hills. But the definition that we have right now is very, very tight, is very, very strict. And a lot of these hills, in fact 90%, as I told you, 90% of the hills are going to lose their status of hills, and in turn they are going to be legally exposed to such hazardous activities. In fact, a lot of important districts are also going to lose their status, lose their degree of protection, because there are a lot of districts in Rajasthan that have made to the list that the Aravallis, they belong to those districts. They are present in those districts. But by a new definition, this new definition that we are talking about, a lot of the important districts have not made it to the list where we say that Aravallis are present in that district. And these important districts, they are Chittorgarh. Chittorgarh has a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and Chittorgarh has not made it to the list of districts which have Aravalli, because as per the new definition, these hills do not qualify as hills anymore. So Chittorgarh has not made it to the list. Then Savai Madhopur has also not made it to the list, and Savai Madhopur has what? The Ranthambore Tiger Reserve. Savai Madhopur has not made it to the list. Chittorgarh has not made it to the list. So how are they going to get the levels of protection that they deserve to have? Because now such activities are going to be allowed in the hills of these districts, in the relief of these districts. So this is going to be a significant challenge, a major challenge for such districts. That is why there is a need of the hour. There's a need of the hour to take some stricter measures. For example, maybe the government can look at identifying the eco-sensitive, the most eco-sensitive or fragile zones. One size does not fit all. Of course, there was a need for a uniform definition of these hills, and the government had to come up with something, but maybe the government can also look at identifying most ecologically sensitive zones or the most fragile zones which require the most protection, and maybe for those areas we can think of having flexible definitions so that they can be given the degree of protection that they deserve to have. So maybe this could be one thing that the government could do. And then the core problem that Aravalli faces at the moment is that it is partially protected. Partially protected meaning that a lot of forests, a lot of areas in the Aravallis are not already protected, because of the lot of forests in the Aravalli are not notified as forests under the Indian Forest Act. That is why they are not because they are not classified as forests, they are not given an adequate degree of protection. Right now, they are already partially protected. Only some national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, they are protected, but a lot of areas in Aravallis are not already designated as as protected areas or not notified as forests. And coming up with such strict definitions for hills also is further going to dilute the protection that the Aravalli range has at the moment. So maybe the government can look at having some flexible definitions, especially in some areas, and giving more and more areas the designation of protected areas, or more and more forests the notification as forests in the Indian Forest Act. So maybe the government can also look at these things so that Aravalli can get adequate protection, which right now is under threat. And if Aravallis are not protected, the entire ecosystem is going to be affected. So that was all for this video. I hope you enjoyed everything that we discussed over here. Now let us practice a question for prelims. With reference to the recent concerns over the protection of the Aravalli Hills, consider the following statements. A new national definition of hills requiring at least 100 meters of local elevation along with slope and base length conditions may exclude a large portion of the Aravalli ranges from being classified as hills. 2. Earlier, a 30-meter elevation difference was proposed to designate Aravalli ridge areas for protection. 3. Under the new definition, districts such as Gurugram and Faridabad may lose the protective Aravalli tag for several low-lying ridges. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 and 2 only, B. 2 and 3 only, C. 1, 2 and 3, or D. 2 only. Please attempt this question and provide your answers in the comment section. We will meet in a new video. Thank you for watching.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.